Thank you very much. That's got to be, okay, is there a clicker up here? Is that it, Jeff?
That's it.
Try one way. Uh-oh. I'm done before I finished. Fantastic. All right, thanks very much, Jeff. I appreciate that. So I don't mean to throw this right off from the very beginning. I'm trying not to sewer myself here. I just want to thank the committee for inviting me to speak to share some of the resources that we have and some of the programs that we have within York Regional Police to address mental health issues, mental illness that we see that occur in the region. It keeps going back. Which one you got to push here? That makes sense. Yeah, I'm a cop. You got to give me a break. So I was sitting about 10 rows back here and kind of wondering where everybody is, and I see that the place must be full of mostly cops and teachers because everybody just sort of migrates to the back. The first 10 rows are kind of like a nuclear waste zone as usual. So, yeah. So just going to go over a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about some statistics, and you heard Dave, the previous speaker, just rattled off one that 1 in 5 statistic that we hear quite often, just address some police calls for service that we have and some particular incidents that we see in our schools and what we're doing in York Region to address these issues and some of the different responses that we see. So in 2016 calendar year, York Regional Police responded to over 4,300 calls for service directly related to EDPs. Now, an EDP is a police term a lot of you will be aware of, some maybe not. It's an emotionally disturbed person. So it covers a large gambit of reactions that we see in the community. It may be as a result of a mental illness that somebody's experiencing. It may be a bit of a situational issue that people have. We see them a lot in relation to situations that an individual may experience in the community, such as they maybe just experience a loss of their father, son, significant other. They've lost their job. The situations have all stacked up against them to cause a bit of a mental breakdown, and we see calls for that. And that 4,300, like I said, is strictly EDP call types. Okay, so beyond that, we see calls for domestic thefts, assist citizens, keep the peace, frauds, where we see various individuals who get themselves in trouble in the community. That's directly related to their mental health. So, we're going to see probably another 1,100-1,500 calls in that category that aren't directly related to that EDP necessarily. They say that 70% of mental health disorders manifest themselves before the age of 18. So, for those of you who deal, the school resource officers and youth education officers that deal in our high schools and our elementary schools, and the teachers certainly that run those classes see those things manifest in the classrooms. And those in society like Catherine, youth probation, youth probation officers see these kinds of things coming up all the time. They say only 1 in 6 children who need mental health services, who require mental health services, receive them. And if they are good enough or lucky enough to have some supports around them, built around them, be it their parents, could be a police officer, certainly, gang officers, things like that. If they do get themselves onto a waiting list, the average wait time is 6 months. So you can imagine the things that happen within that 6-month period before any real meaningful assistance is provided to that person. And the sort of the last troubling thing that we see is suicide is among the leading causes of death in the ages of 15 to 24, second only to accidents in our society. So that's statistics that we've seen come across fairly often in the last little while. So in general, the kinds of calls that we see involving our EDP population, out of control behavior, situational crisis like I described, certainly suicide threats, we see lots and lots of those. Mischief to property, missing vulnerable persons, cutting self-harm behavior, though not a suicide-related issue. The cutting and the self-harm, we've seen a huge increase in that in the past, I'd say 5 or 6 years. Certainly when I was a road officer, it was nothing we'd ever heard of. If somebody was cutting themselves, they were trying to commit suicide or had a thought of suicide in their mind. Now, a lot better understood the cutting and the self-harm behavior is an anxiety release. a way to control the tension that they have them, to distract them from their worries, and it manifests in various ways, including cutting themselves on the wrist. You know, it could be picking their skin, lots of different things like that, pulling their hair out. You know, and I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. Addictions for sure. Sort of that comorbidity that goes along with mental health. We saw a lot of times we see if they have mental health issues, they're going to have an addiction issue. So it may be, say, related to marijuana, where the use of marijuana has brought on the onset of the mental health issue. Certainly there are statistics that show that, and we see that a lot in the schizophrenia induced in our younger population. And acts of violence and behaviors, though that is, and I put that last on purpose, it's a very small majority of the kinds of behaviors that we see manifested if a person is experiencing mental illness. So I make a point of speaking to the point that, you know, because you have a mental illness, you're not necessarily prone to acts of violence. The kinds of calls that we see in our schools, certainly, it's going to be no news to you, the people that deal in the schools are threats, assaults, bullying, that out of control behavior in the class. You know, I want to say it was Peel Region just last week or the week before last where it hit the news that had happened quite a while ago, unfortunately, but it just took that long before it hit the news, where a couple of officers responding to out of control behavior, a student in class, and they handcuffed the student, right? You know, you hear it sort of from both sides. From the parents' side, you know, was that necessary? And maybe though we haven't heard from the police side, but I would expect, being involved in the business, at the end of the day, the officers are going to go, what did you expect us to do? You send us to this call, out of control behavior. There's no criminal offense happening, but we need to stop the child from hurting themselves. You know, you can't stand there and watch this happen, so they do something. You know, they chose to use handcuffs. Right or wrong, I'm not going to make that call. You know, it's a judgment that'll have to be made, and no doubt be made for them at some point, and hopefully it's, you know, maybe some better things come out of it, some training, and that's usually what has to happen in the police world. Things have to happen, and then we get trained as a result of it. So supports and resource information, we get lots of calls from the different schools that we deal with, and we've got really good relationships with our district board and our Catholic board within York Region, and there's certainly lots of two-way flow back and forth there. VTRAs, I know not all school boards use this. It's a violent threat risk assessment. It's a process that we undertake when there's a criminal offense and there's a standard set of criminal offenses that if these things take place in our schools, mandatory notification to the police, and as a result of it, a VTRA meeting is held. So it's a conglomeration of school principals, some teachers, some resources. A lot of times, well, actually, vast majority of times it includes usually our school resource officers if it's in the high schools, and our youth education officers if it's in our primary schools. Sometimes my mental health people will attend those things if there's a mental health component behind those things, and basically a meeting of the minds to discuss the level of risk involved with that criminal offense that's taken place. And sometimes many times we'll put some supports in place to address those mental health issues that are causing or manifesting in that kind of behavior. So, you know, I dream of the day when, you know, when the police officers that I work with, social workers that we work with, you know, teachers don't have to be involved with these kinds of calls. You know, I think one day we'll get there. Right now, you know, when you have out of control behaviors, criminal offenses taking place as a result of the mental health, you know, you call our emergency communication center and you get police, fire, ambulance, and I hope one day we'll be able to add that mental health to that, where you're not getting the response of the police officers who bring guns, who bring tasers, who bring batons to incidents involving mental health. And, you know, certainly we see the news flashes all the time. Police officer shoots a mentally ill person. You know, if we had a different method to respond to these things in society, then hopefully we would stay away from those kinds of things. You know, I think we're getting better. I know in York Regional Police, there was just over 1/10% of our calls, of those 4,300 calls, there was any injury involved. And I include both the police officer and the mentally ill person on those sides. So it's a very, very small percentage of people that ever become injured as a result of it. And more often than not, if it is an injury, It's very minimal in nature, thank God. So some of the things that we have at our hands within York Regional Police, we have our mental health support teams and co-response crisis workers. I'll explain those a little bit in a second. We have 2 models of frontline crisis response in York Region, just kind of the way our funding's set up, and then we've taken advantage of it. We have social workers that are employed by York Regional Police. In June 27th of 2016, we hired 2 social workers. One of them had worked with us on the mental health support team, and they've been an invaluable contribution to the resources that we have within the police service, and I'll go over them quickly. The York Region Mental Health and Addictions Rapid Response Table. Certainly there are a few participants sitting in the room here today, so I'll expand on that and just maybe add a little bit more about the features. So in an overall sense, the goals of York Regional Police Mental Health Resources, all those teams that I've just mentioned on the previous page, are, ideally when we get out front of these calls for service or a response to that live call in the community, we're conducting assessment of the person's mental health status, risk to themselves, harm to themselves, or harm to others, and providing those attending officers with a guidance. So the attending officers are the frontline uniformed police officers. We're lending our expertise because we have extra training, and we're working with actual crisis workers, social workers who have, for the most part, master's degrees, and this is their role in society. So we're letting them do their work to lend that critical eye to these frontline responses so we can keep people out of the hospitals, help de-escalate it, and provide a resolution to the occurrence. We can develop crisis management plans for these people, so hopefully the next time they experience or are about to experience, because certainly these people often say to us, I knew I was getting to this point because I was starting to feel anxious, or every morning when I wake up, I hear this one little voice off in the background. Well, if we can get these people out in front of these things with these crisis management plans, we set down sort of a 10-point list where number 10 is call 911, and the first 9 things are, call my counselor, maybe make a trip to the hospital, make sure I have my medication, I've taken it today, call my mom or my dad who might be able to help me talk me out of these things. Beyond that, we can provide resources and supports for the persons and their family. We have vast resources in the York Region. 2 minutes? Holy Jesus, I better hide. 2 minutes? Seriously? Wow. Okay, I'll hurry. Assist at the hospital. You guys just want to read these things? Anyways, we'll go to the hospitals. We can assist there. We know the doctors. We know psychiatrists and nurses. We can get people in and out of the hospital faster if they happen to get there, and liaise with the court. So mental health support. I've got a non-uniformed police officer working with a crisis worker on the road 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. Their primary responsibility is to attend to those live calls. So uniformed police officers don't actually have to interact for the full call. We can get there, get out front, help with those resources, help with the de-escalation. If there have to be an apprehension and take that person to the hospital, we can help take them to the hospital and make those contacts with the doctors and advocate for their admission. Certainly we do that on a regular basis. That's 10 to 10, 7 days a week. Co-response is we have crisis workers working independent of a police officer. They'll attend to the frontline calls with uniformed police officers without that plainclothes police officer component of the team. Some extra funding became available. We didn't have it available on our side, so we made use of the crisis workers that come from York Support Services Network. And they're an entity in York Region that provides that mental health. He's going to kick me off the stage here. What if I'll just keep running around. I'm pretty fast for an old guy, so. The York Regional Police social workers that we hired, we've got 2 of them. As far as I know, we're the first in Ontario to hire social workers strictly for the mental health frontline response. Critical eye on the occurrences. We read every single EDP occurrence that comes through our workflow every day that our frontline response officers have responded to the previous day. And they're looking at those occurrences to see how they can help these people not come in contact with the police again, hook them up with some resources and some crisis management planning. Addiction and mental health rapid response table. Multi-agency membership at this table. There's youth probation, our hospitals, paramedics, CMHA, YSSN, lots of letters. York Regional Police sits on it. And it's basically we bring situations to the table where if we don't do something too sweet, something really bad is going to happen to this person. So we're engaging these people right up front. So I'm trying to do this some justice with a real small amount of time. So just quickly, and I'll end it with this maybe then, just to say that if we can get my teams involved in these calls right up front, we apprehend much less. We take people to the hospital much less. So frontline officers alone apprehend about 60% of the time. When my teams are involved, it's about 25% of the time. Ideally, we leave these people at home or in school or wherever we find them, not take them to the hospital, because I'll tell you what, the hospital is not a great place for a mentally ill person. For the most part, they come out sicker than when they came in. So, you know what, then just some of our resources that we've got, and I'll leave it at that. Sorry for taking so long.